So welcome everyone to Tara Institute. My name's Damien, and this month I'm going to be talking about cause and effect. So rather than using the word karma, because unfortunately we have a few overlays to the word karma which maybe are not quite correct, but the correct term is karma in Sanskrit, and it can be translated as action. But what we're really talking about here is cause and effect. And it's important to note that cause and effect is really the underpinning of all Buddhist action of a person. You know, that the practice of Buddhism, or the practice of a person following the teachings of the Buddha, it's really all about cause and effect. Endeavouring to produce the causes for a better me and a better future, and for the benefit of all living beings. And so the foundation for that is this concept of the relationship between cause and effect. So tonight I just want to talk in general about that idea, you know, that for us, you know, we all know that you know, we live in a cause and effect world. You go down to the supermarket and you pay money and you buy groceries, and you can see that there's a relationship in the simplest actions of, for me to accomplish a certain action, like getting a bag full of groceries, I need to pay money. And so there's this sort of very simplistic cause and effect that we live our lives by. So here, and tonight, I really like you to think, how much do I believe in cause and effect? You know, so the test of how much you believe in cause and effect is when you think, I am completely undeserving of this situation. You know, this has got nothing to do with me. This is completely not caused by me in any way. And, you know, this sort of concept of unfair. And I know this is going to be challenging and will prompt a lot of questions. So I'd like to sort of pose this question, that if I think, you know, for instance, in the traffic a few weeks ago, somebody brake checked me. You know, they just suddenly drove in front of me and banged on their brakes. And I'm thinking, what? Like, what's this all about? So I must have done something that in his mind was abusive or impeded his progress or something. Maybe me merely observing the speed limit was enough to trigger him that I was worthy of being sort of attacked in that manner. You know, zoom in front of me and jam on the brakes, and I have to make an evasive action not to run into him. And then he did it again. And you think, well, okay, there's something has caused this. But justly or unjustly. I mean, it's a petty example, but it's just something about the pervasiveness of cause and effect. So, Christians, the Judeo-Christian tradition, believe in a creator God, that everything is created by God. Everything. Whatever happens to me, good or bad, is created by God. And both, like Geshe Doga, our teacher here, and His Holiness the Dalai Lama, have both often remarked about there's a huge value in a person completely embracing the idea of a creator God, because whatever happens, good or bad, that person says this is God's will, and so they don't enter a sort of emotional turmoil about feeling a victim or feeling anything. They just commit themselves to the idea that everything is God's will. Now, that element of, I think to some degree, that element of Christianity in our society has probably disappeared, but it's interesting that is the fundamental aspect of their philosophy. And like Geshe Doga has remarked a few times, that the person that commits to that it can achieve a level of selflessness because they're not obsessed with themselves in relation to the world, because they have committed to this idea about a creator God. So Buddhism doesn't believe in a creator God. So the Buddhist idea is very different. But it's good if we understand, like that. I mean, most of us have been sort of brought up with a Judeo-Christian sort of tradition, and it's good to understand exactly what that tradition is saying, because then you can understand how Buddhism is so different to that. And so in Buddhism, the essence of the Buddhist view is this concept called dependent arising. And cause and effect is part of that dependent arising explanation of life. So, cause and action. If I do some action and a powerful action, like striking somebody out of anger, for instance, then that action, from the cause and effect sort of point of view, that action has two aspects. It has that causal aspect, and it has a resultant aspect. And the resultant aspect occurs sometime in the future. And the resultant aspect and the causal aspect are related. And they're related in that they are of the same nature. So that my action of striking somebody out of anger will result in me having an experience of being struck, of being harmed. So to understand that sort of simple relationship, if you plant an apple seed, you will get an apple tree. You won't get a peach tree or bananas or marijuana or anything else. The cause and the effect are connected. They're connected. And so that's the first thing to understand about cause and effect, is that the result is related and connected to the cause, and that the nature of the result is the same as the nature of the cause. So if the cause is a harmful action, the result will be a harmful action. If the cause is a beneficial action, the result will be a beneficial action. So the Buddha said, from generosity comes wealth, from patience comes beauty, and from morality comes, good rebirth and the highest of things. So if we can start to understand, for instance, from generosity, so you think, as ordinary people, we think, what? if I give my money away, you're telling me I'm going to become wealthy. No, I'm giving my money away. That means I'm less wealthy. So our own mind sees things in a very sort of, maybe you call it a really direct way, that, if I give my money away, you're telling me I'm going to be wealthy. No way. If I give my money away, I am less wealthy. So what does the Buddha mean when he says, from generosity comes wealth? So this is the thing about cause and effect. So tonight, in the meditations, I'm going to ask you for you to think. What do you believe in these simple examples that if I practice generosity, does my wealth go up or does my wealth go down? If I practice patience, does my environment, does my situation get better, or do I just suffer a loss, a humiliation by giving the others what they want? Like if I think that's what patience is, if I think patience is letting somebody bully me, does that mean that my situation gets better or gets worse? What do I actually believe today is the way the world works? And it's important to try to, I think the one thing about Buddhism, I think that's very important, is that it is transformation. And it's important to think of it as transformation, because part of recognising it as transformation is that you accept that me, as I am right now, is imperfect. It's a very important recognition. So that they give this analogy that we should approach the Dharma or Buddhist teachings thinking that I am sick. I'm sick. I am imperfect. Recognize, and ideally recognizing exactly what that sickness is that I am suffering from. What is that sickness? Then to recognize that the Buddha is like a doctor. And the doctor has the correct advice for my sickness. And that the Buddha's teachings are the medicine. The Buddha's teachings are the medicine. And for me to overcome my sickness, I must take the medicine, which means I have to assimilate myself with the teachings of the Buddha, to embrace them and to put it into practice. Not to leave the medicine in a bottle, not to leave your Dharma books on a shelf, never read or never practiced, but to take the medicine. So the idea is to take the medicine. And with that, a recognition that the Buddha is a fully perfected being, has no fault. Hence, the advice that the Buddha gives is perfect advice because it comes from a basis of no fault. And so that this need is for me to take the medicine, and then to recognise that the people that help you, like the teachers, the lamas, they're like the nurses that assist us in getting better. But the most important aspect of that whole analysis is to recognise that. Is that Siri answering a question? Okay. So the most important aspect of that is to come to some recognition that I am imperfect and that I am sick. I am sick in a particular way, and to identify what is that sickness that I suffer from. So if we want to talk about that aspect, we can go to the very first teaching of the Buddha, where he taught what's called, referred to as the Four Noble Truths. And so the Four Noble Truths are the truth of suffering, and then the truth of the cause of suffering, the truth that suffering can have cessation, that the suffering can cease, and the truth that there is a path that leads to that cessation. So, in effect, those Four Noble Truths are two sets of cause and effect. So the first set of cause and effect is that due to the causes of suffering, I suffer. And then the second cause and effect is that my suffering can be completely ceased if I follow the path that leads to cessation. So the first two, this recognition that that I am sick, I am suffering. So sometimes the truth of suffering is translated, particularly in some traditions, and I think it's a very good translation, is rather than the truth of suffering, the truth of dissatisfactoriness. The truth of dissatisfactoriness, which you could say is like the truth of disappointment, the truth of feeling deceived, the truth of unending non-accomplishment of one's goals of happiness. You know, that truth of suffering is just the endless non-accomplishment of happiness, a truth of dissatisfaction in life, endlessly in life, a truth of dissatisfaction. You know, that's what the truth of suffering is talking about. And then the cause of that is karma, which really means previous actions. So previous actions. And the second cause is delusion, deluded thinking, afflicted thinking, you know, anger, jealousy, pride, and acting out of anger, jealousy, pride, attachment, resentment, competitiveness, ignorance, you know, acting out of that, we then produce karma, or we produce a cause and effect cycle that then results in dissatisfactoriness for us. So, truth of cause and the truth of suffering. So, to recognize, so the truth of suffering is really saying to us to accept or to recognize that I am endlessly dissatisfied. You know, endlessly dissatisfied. And to then recognise that that comes from a cause. So, this is the whole challenge of cause and effect. And, you know, it's considered the most difficult thing to understand in Buddhism. And for us as ordinary beings, it's effectively hidden. The reality of karma, for us, is effectively a completely hidden phenomena. We cannot actually see it. So, an example of that is you have these horrific accidents, and one person. You have these horrific accidents, like an aeroplane crashes, and for some reason, a person does not get on the aeroplane. You know, they have something happens, and they don't get there on time, or their ticket doesn't register, or their credit card fails, and they discover they haven't got a ticket, and they do not get on the aeroplane. And then they don't get killed. And then somebody else, like, you know, in Titanic, miraculously gets the ticket just before boarding the ship. You know, it's a story, but that's the example. That they think they're lucky because they've suddenly got onto some situation, but it's unfortunately not a good situation. So the working of karma is really complex. Somebody wins $1 billion in a lottery, you know, like $1 billion. And then 5 years' time, like nearly all lottery winners, it's gone. So there's this, you know, this sort of complex thing of cause and effect. So that part of it, we can, in the next few weeks, I'd like to talk to you about the different examples of negative actions and positive actions, and how the results come from those actions. And we can sort of work through some of the traditional explanations of all of those things, you know. You know, if you say to somebody, you know, how do you get a good life? How do you get a good life? And they'll say, oh, if you get a good qualification, if you work hard and you devote yourself to your work, then you'll be rich, you'll have comfort and things. Well, try telling that to all the people in India and Africa who are educated, who have tried, they work very, very hard, and they just remain in poverty their whole life. And that other people, that, you know, Australia is it maybe not as generous as it used to be, but still in Australia, everybody is sort of looked after to some degree. You know, in most countries in the world, that does not happen. If you're not able to look after yourself, you are well and truly stuffed, you know. Like, you are really in big problem. So these are all aspects of karma, and we can sort of talk about how that arises. But the challenge of Buddhism is to totally commit yourself to the idea that all of my joy and suffering, my mental and physical my mental and physical experiences are the result of a cause, of causes. And that the accumulation of my actions will determine what happens to me in the future. And so the reason it becomes very difficult to understand is because this accumulation of my actions is not just from this life, but it is from countless past lives. And so many of the things that I experience are not necessarily due to something I've done in this life, but they're due to something that I've accumulated in past life and past actions. So one thing that they encourage us to think is to develop a sense of gratitude to the past life you in a past life have created the situation where you've become living in Australia, maybe not even born in Australia, but somehow ended up in Australia, and you're able to experience the environment and the life that we have in Australia, which is relatively very good. And so we should develop a sense of gratitude to the previous me that created that circumstance. Because in a way I can say, well, it wasn't me that made me get born in Australia. In a way I can say that, it wasn't sort of me that created that good karma, but whatever the previous me was, whoever that was, somehow created that circumstance. And so then what am I going to do for the future me? What am I going to give? People often think, what am I going to give my children? And then they come to realise, well, it doesn't matter what I think I can give my children. They're deciding it themselves what they're going to be. But for us, my own future, I can give my future self something valuable through my actions. So to have that thought of preparing something worthwhile for your future. So these are all different aspects of cause and effect. We can squander what we were given by just experiencing it and exhausting it and not caring what we do, or we can endeavour to do something worthwhile that will benefit my future self. So that's a sort of a valuable idea in Buddhism. All right, so we'll do some meditation. And can I ask if there's anybody here for the very first time tonight? There's a few people. Oh, good, great, welcome. So I hope it's not too much for you. But yeah, so have you done meditation before? Have you done a little bit? Okay. So we'll just do some simple meditations, and we'll just focus on the breath. And so nominally we're going to focus on the sensation of the breath as it comes in and goes out. And ideally, it's important for us to recognise that, you know, there may be a little bit of a physical sensation, but I observe that sensation by experiencing it in my mind. You know, I experience everything in my mind. So there's the physical breath, but then there's an awareness of the breath as well. And so in the breathing meditation, and basically in any meditation that we do, we try to focus on the awareness of the object, rather than the sensory object itself. So I don't know if that makes much sense to you. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me in practice, I can tell you, but that's the goal, is to focus on the mental awareness of the breath. So your mental experience of the breath. And so then that means that the mind focusing on the object and the object itself are both mental. They're both mental rather than physical, right? And that's important for developing good meditation. Anyway, so we're focusing on the breath and ideally on the awareness, that awareness. So try that. And before we get there, we just become aware of what you're focusing on. You know, what's in your mind? What are you experiencing? And bring that into this moment. So forget the past, forget the future, bring it into this present moment and into this room, this place, inside, into yourself, you know, nothing outside. And keep letting go of any distracting thoughts, and then when your mind is clear of any distraction, then turn your attention onto the breath, just as it comes in and goes out, and hold it 100% on the breath. just relax your concentration a little bit and just review what happened in your meditation. Just reflect on whether you were focused on your breath, without distraction, without sleepiness. And let's just repeat the same meditation, but with a strong determination to do this meditation as well as I can, focusing on the breath 100%, recognizing that it's important to develop concentration. It's important to develop concentration to be able to assist understanding cause and effect, and to be able to develop ultimate compassion and love for others, and to develop wisdom. That for all of these things we need to be able to have a very powerful concentration. And so we're doing this breathing meditation to develop our power of concentration. So a strong motivation and a determination for 100% concentration. You just repeat the whole meditation. Relax your concentration again, just a little bit, and once again review your meditation. Accepting that there might have been some distraction or sleepiness, some chatter, accepting that, and then resolving to overcome that. And then we'll just do one very short, another breathing meditation. Just repeat the same meditation, but with a strong determination to keep the concentration just on that breath. And just relax your concentration a little bit. So now that we have sort of settled our mind through that meditation, our minds are a little bit clearer, a bit more subdued. We can spend just a few minutes just contemplating, so analysing your own approach to life or your own thinking, and try to identify what do you believe in terms of cause and effect. What do you believe in terms of causality, in terms of your ability to change your future or your ability to transform? What do you see? What do you see as the possibility of that, or what do you see as cause and effect, or some other mechanism? So to try to clearly identify your own belief system at this moment. So just examine within yourself, what do you believe? And you bring your mind back to the room. So, with probably applies to any philosophy, any religion or whatever, but particularly from like a Buddhist point of view, I think, important to recognise, and it can be from cultural upbringing, from religious upbringing, from books you've read, from people you've been exposed to, from your own thinking, that we've probably assembled some sort of personal philosophy of life. There's something that we think is true. And it's good to understand, what is it that I think is true, particularly in terms of this, of my future, my present, my past. So His Holiness the Dalai Lama says that the major religions of the world all answer three questions. Who am I? Where did I come from? And where am I going? So in a way, whatever our own philosophy is, let's answer those three questions. Who am I? Where did I come from? Where am I going? And how am I doing it? Like, what do I think is the method? And so then Buddhism is presenting, here's what the Buddha said. So we can compare what I think to what the Buddha said, and then we can start to try to understand that, and then adopt it or not adopt it, or whatever it is we choose to do, But the process is to understand what is my philosophy? What is it? What do I think reality is? And then to check whether that's true or not. This is sort of the process. So we got time for questions now. So if anybody would like to share their idea of truth and reality. Empty vessel. Well, empty vessel is good because it can be filled up with something.
We know where we come from.
No, I didn't say we know, but I said they're the questions. Well, so the thing is, it's interesting, His Holiness talks about these three questions, and he says religions answer these three questions. You know, who am I, or what am I? You know, where did I come from? Where am I going? And so cause and effect is the relationship between where did I come from and where am I going. That's what cause and effect is. That's the relationship between those two things. Yeah, sorry.
Do you think it's fair to have karma from your past lives when you don't even know what you did?
So the question is it fair? Is it fair that we have karma from our past lives, even though we can't remember what it is that we did? Well, whether it's fair or not, for us here, it's relatively extraordinary, you know.
But what if it wasn't? What if you didn't have a good life?
Well, often it's good to not worry too much about others, but to think about your own circumstance. So in your own circumstance, there's a lot to be grateful for. All right. Now, so your question, maybe in the next few weeks we'll go into that a bit more deeply. But so one of the analogies they talk about in relation to this question about your past, you know, you think, well, that's a different person that somehow was living in the past, and they've done actions which both benefit me and harm me. You know, like I have terrible things happen that I think, well, it's unfair, I haven't created this circumstance. But one of the analogies they give is it reasonable for the hand to protect the foot from injury? So the hand is not the foot. But the reality is for us, to protect the foot from injury, we may have to use our hand to protect the foot. But the suffering of the foot is not the suffering of the hand, but the hand can protect the foot. So the actions created by a past life, we might think, well, that's not me. But there is a connection. You know, there is a connection, but it's not. It's sort of like not a direct. It's not. I don't know if the term direct is the right word, but you know, we think there's a separation. We think there's a separation, but there isn't a separation. It's the same continuum, and so it's like saying, you know, a 40-year-old man who, when he was 18 and a juvenile delinquent, created an action as a juvenile delinquent, but it causes suffering when he's 40 years old because of legal consequences or something, and he says, why now, me as an adult? It is unfair that I should suffer a consequence from something I did as an undisciplined, ill-informed juvenile, you know, with a juvenile mind. Yet an action that was done by that juvenile mind now harms me as a 40-year-old adult. And this is the situation of a lot of people, that they have crimes or misdemeanours or something from their teenage years that damage their life as a fully grown adult. And you think, so the person might think, that's unfair. You know, it's the same. I don't know if this analogy is working for you, but you can see that there's a person might do something at some point, and the consequences are huge, and they suffer those consequences even though they're long past that state of mind that did the harm in the first place. You know, like as you grow up, like as you... Why? Yeah. Yeah, so the observation is about people learning from past experiences. But you can see that sometimes the action has a consequence that lasts well beyond the time that you regret it. It's strong. Yeah, so one of the aspects of karma is that karma, an action, its consequences are increasing. And the analogy is that you just plant a tiny seed and an enormous tree can grow from that seed. And so if we do an action, the consequences from that action can be enormous. Enormously good or enormously destructive. But in both cases, one small action can have enormous consequences. And we see that in the world all the time. You know, we see that everywhere in the world all the time. So, saying it's unfair is a judgmental... It's like saying gravity is so unfair. You know, or the wetness of water, that is so unfair. You know, the taste of a banana, no, that's really unfair. You know, there's something about wailing at the moon, and you know, there's what's some of the, you know, King Canute with the, you know, he demonstrated to his people that he was not an omnipotent king by planting his chair on the beach and telling the tide not to come in. You know, that's the story. You know, that he planted his throne on the beach and, you know, all the people saying, oh, you're the great king. So he planted his throne on the beach and he said to the ocean, do not come in. You know, but does the ocean come in? The ocean comes in, goes out. You know, the beach today, like all along the bay, I think there's a lot of damage. The bathing boxes washed away, the waves crashing over the paths and eroding everything. Fair or unfair is irrelevant. It's just a reality. So that's something to sort of come to grips with, that in terms of my experience, I have control over my experience. You know, I may not be able to exercise that control, but I do have, you know, ultimately I have control over whether I experience joy or whether I experience unhappiness. But the external circumstances, trying to apply fair and unfair to the world is difficult. Really difficult. But for me, the one thing I have, I should say, the one thing potentially I have is control over my own mind. Potentially. You know, because that's the truth of suffering. The truth of suffering, karma, you know, past actions, but most importantly, delusion. If my thinking is deluded, I will destroy my happiness. If I am able to not have deluded thinking, then no matter what the circumstances, I can remain peaceful and happy. But that's the one thing that is in my hands to develop. But whether the tide comes in, goes out, whether it's 100 mile an hour wind or nothing, is something else, and for me to judge that is really unproductive, you know. So that's sort of an important step to come to, is to the separation of your experience, your internal experience, your happiness, your joy, your suffering, your turmoil, to separate that from the external presentation, you know, because we actually have the ability to separate our experience from the perception of the world, from how we see the world. So I might see these storms as terrible, destructive, and I'm depressed by it, I'm this and that. Well, you don't have to be. That's a decision that you make, to be depressed or disturbed by something external. You know, that's some sort of decision we make. And we may not have much power to stop that at the moment, but ultimately we do not have to be in that situation, you know. And that's really important to understand. You know, whether it's the breaking up of a relationship or the loss of a job or a theft or something that happens to you, an injury or whatever it is, that ultimately your experience and that external circumstance is not inherently connected, you know. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, so the question is about that it appears to be a contradiction there. So the cause and effect connection, and these are the things I'll be talking about in the next few weeks, but the cause and effect connection is predominantly in terms of my experience, not necessarily the external factors. So, for example, is it possible for a billionaire to feel poor? You know, for a billionaire to feel that they do not have enough wealth. You know, that they're inferior to this multi-billionaire over here, and that they're missing out. But they're a billionaire. And is it possible for a poor person to feel completely great? Right. So the external circumstance of the actual number of dollars or the number of diamonds or the number of gold bars or whatever is pretty much irrelevant to what the person experiences. But, yeah, so what's your but? Sorry?
But then you're talking about delusion as well.
Yeah, well, that's the point, is that perception of feeling poor when you're a billionaire is a delusion. That's the point. And it's the delusion which actually causes the suffering. Right? So that's the point, yeah. Attachment, yeah. Attachment to greater wealth. So the attachment to greater wealth, thinking that $1 billion is not enough. You know, the unsatisfied desire, the unsatisfied, incomplete feeling, that's what causes the suffering. Even though you've got $1 billion. Yeah.
Yeah, you kind of mentioned bullying before.
Yeah.
So at what point do you stick it out in that situation when someone is constantly coming at you to, you know, this is what I have to deal with, I've caused this, I can learn from this. At what point do you do that, and at what point do you walk away?
Yeah, so the question is about bullying. I'm not a big fan of that theory about everything comes to me as an opportunity to learn. You know, in that sort of idea that, you have to put up with it because this is a lesson in life that you're supposed to, that there's some external agency sending you all these life lessons. That's not a Buddhist belief. That's, to be clear, that idea that there's some external determiner who's sending you all these experiences for you to learn from. I don't like that. I don't like that philosophy at all. And I don't believe that's a Buddhist approach at all. But there's a great Tibetan yogi saint called Milarepa, and he's drawn like this. He's drawn like this with his hand on his ear, like this. And it's to identify that he used every experience in life to learn from. So although I say there is no external agency sending you these life experiences to learn from, the reality is that we can learn from every life experience. But we're doing that ourselves. That's a choice that we make to learn, like Milarepa. We learn from every experience. We perceive everything and learn from everything. But that does not mean that there's some external agency that's thrown you into some circumstance that you have to put up with. You don't have to put up with that circumstance. If you're able to leave or to change or whatever, then leave and change. There's absolutely, yeah. Yep.
I need to carry this over till next week, but the question occurred to me that if we do have past lives, we benefit more from having had those past lives if we have greater awareness of them.
So the question is whether having awareness of past lives would be beneficial. Basically, that's what you're saying, isn't it?
Well, it seems that what I'm hearing is we don't have awareness, but we're still benefiting in some ways.
Yeah.
Which leaves me wondering,
Would it be better to remember? Well, look, I just to be open disclosure here, I've got no idea what my past lives were, at all. And sometimes people go to clairvoyance and they ask them. I don't do that. I don't. I've been to a lot of clairvoyance. I like going to clairvoyance and that sort of thing, but I don't ask them. But I think.
It's a fundamental tenet, if I understand correctly, of Buddhism, that we do not recall our past lives. Is that not?
No, it's not a fundamental. So the question is it a fundamental tenet of Buddhism that we do not recall our past lives? No, it's not. But the actual cause for us to forget past lives is said to, this is maybe a little bit out there, but it's said to be the trauma of the conception, that when the consciousness enters the fetus at the time of conception, that the trauma of that, the experience of the consciousness taking up a new body is such a traumatic experience that it sort of wipes your ability to remember past lives, for what it's worth. That's the explanation. So some people, for whatever reason, can remember past lives. And I'm not a big fan of this, but there's documentation of children who said, I want to visit my other mother and father. And, they then go to another place and they say, this is my, and they lost a child young or something, documentation. I'm not as an engineer, I'm not a huge fan of those stories, but those stories exist. But the general explanation is that we lose all of our memory of past lives because of the trauma of conception, when the consciousness enters the fetus and the new life begins, that is such a shocking experience, taking up a new body, that it's traumatic, So. Yeah.
I just wondered how
Look, we have to talk a bit more about that, because there's a physical inheritance and then there's a karmic inheritance. They're connected, but they're separate, yeah. And look, we can talk about that some more. I see people are getting restless, so we better not. And it's a big topic, and there's a lot of very confronting aspects, in this whole discussion of cause and effect. But to keep in mind, it's the absolute underpinning of how we can transform ourselves is through the observation of cause and effect. And also, I think, for me, an explanation of reality. Really important. If you want to understand reality, then cause and effect explains to you how a buffoon can become a president, or or how things happen. Different things happen. Terrible things happen. Great things happen. This is cause and effect. Things can happen.
Will you be talking about collective karma?
And collective. So one aspect is collective karma, and so like in Australia we have a collective karma.
You mentioned how the food becomes.
I didn't say that. No. Well, that's an aspect of collective karma. Yeah, absolutely. And look, no, we'll have to. Well, all right, one last question.
I just think that it seems really paradoxical, the sort of the notion that it's not. Sorry, I know what I want to say. I'm trying to work out how to say it. It's that it's not something you do, but it's something. It's not from outside of us.
So, well, look, I think maybe sit on that question for a while, but. So I'll just mention one of the aspects of karma, that we create an action. So one of the aspects of the result is that there's two aspects to the result. One is that we have a disposition the same as what caused the initial action. And what that means is that, for instance, if I killed somebody, part of the consequence of having killed somebody is that I have the disposition to kill again, right? I have an easier it's opened the door to a propensity to kill. And so if you observe amongst people, you'll see some children they love killing things when they're young, and they can lose that, but they have a propensity to kill. And unfortunately, some adults also, right? And the second aspect of that is it's called the result, similar to the cause, in terms of your experience. And so then that cause creates a circumstance where you may have a violent or premature death. Because you've created, by killing somebody, the primary thing that you've done is you've created a premature death for that person or that animal or whatever. If it was going to live 10 years and you kill it when it's 5 years old, then you've caused a premature death. And so the karmic result of that is that you will experience a premature death. And so the prevalence in this, and everybody is subject to it. This is another aspect that we'll talk about, is never feel that you're somehow superior to others, because the reality is we have all done everything. That's the reality. And so there's a prevalence in our society of premature death, through accidents or cancer or disease or, all sorts of things, Yeah. So we'll stay away from the stuff that gets people sort of upset. But let's, the thing is what I'd like to do is for you to examine the basic principles, and that's why I asked, what do you think right now in terms of what do you think in terms of your own philosophy? And then we can start to talk about the Buddhist philosophy, what it means. And then, over time, by thinking about it and reading and studying, you can gradually come to accept the Buddhist thing. But at the beginning, we are all filled with but what about this? What if that? What about that? Well, I don't believe that. That can't be true. That's so unfair. That's the way we react. But so the biggest problem with talking about cause and effect is that you have to put aside a lot of that stuff until you understand enough to start thinking about it yourself, because it's difficult. It is difficult to come to grips with some of the consequences of cause and effect. Yeah, just last one, very last one.
This was something that what I heard you say a while back, which was within the philosophy of Buddhism to sort of give yourself to the Buddha, you relieve yourself from struggle or suffering. Within my own, I haven't done much of this or Buddhism, so pretty new on it, but within my sort of philosophy of the world, I don't think that struggling ever ends. Whether you're a billionaire or a millionaire or you're extremely happy, it's that cause and effect. If you want to get something, you want to get out of bed, you got to have the
force. You got to put effort. You got to put effort in. Yep.
Whatever anything is, there's always struggle within it.
Yep.
So how, by freeing yourself into the Buddhism religion or to the Buddha, how do we relieve ourselves from struggle when struggle is within everything?
Yeah, look, I think if you've come at your young age to that observation, that's a really good thing, a really good observation, because what you're seeing is the dissatisfactoriness of all experience. If that's what you're saying, you see the element of struggle in everything, right? So that's a very good observation. And so that is part of those first two of the Four Noble Truths. So the first teaching of the Buddha, you're sort of tuning in a bit to the truth of suffering. So the next thing is to tune in a little bit to the truth of cessation, that an ending of suffering is possible. So that's the challenge of the Four Noble Truths, is that we can start to see how everything is unsatisfactory. We can start to see that. Then we have to realise that it's possible for that to cease completely. And why? Because it has a cause. And to completely cease also has a cause. And that's the path that the Buddha taught. Is the method, it's the method to achieve the truth of cessation, the ending of that dissatisfactoriness. So you've done really well to identify that element of struggle or dissatisfactoriness in all of life, whether billionaires or poor or whatever. That's an important realization to come to. But it is the important thing is it's not depressing. That observation is not depressing because, and this is where the cause and effect is so important, because if you did not believe that it had a cause, you would think this is endlessly depressing. But if you can understand that it has a cause, it opens the door that if you stop doing the cause, you will not experience the result. If you stop the cause, you stop the result.
And is that cause like that attachment? That to say, for example, like your 8 worldly concerns and that judgment and those, what would be considered?
They're all elements. But the primary thing is what they call the affliction. So hatred, anger, hatred, desire, attachment, and ignorance, and then jealousy, pride, and wrong view. They're the 6 root afflictions, and then all of the other things like competitiveness or resentment or jealousy, etc. They're all elements of that afflictive thinking. All right. So yeah, but absolutely, and your observation is really great, and I commend you for it. But to then step to the idea that has a cause, and if I stop that cause, then the unsatisfactoriness or the struggle or that will cease. Anyway, that's a good note to finish on. So thank you. So let's just do a very quick dedication meditation. So to think that this is, it's great to have these discussions, to start thinking about this, and to that the possibility of transformation is in our own hands. And so just think that takes the form of white light, and let it dissolve completely into you through the crown of your head. And imagine it completely filling your body and your mind with peace and clarity. And then let that radiate out to every other living being. So we pass it on. We pass it on to every other living being, and bring them some peace and clarity, happiness, and a freedom from their suffering. So thank you very much. There's some cake or biscuits and tea in the coffee corner or in the dining room. And also Cynthia is in the bookshop tonight, so if you'd like to have a look at some books in the bookshop, Cynthia's in there tonight. And so this week, think about your own philosophy. Think about, how do I think the world works? How does it work? And then, we can progress next week. So thank you.